Washington wins France's confidence with the Battle of Saratoga. This is in New York. This is the first major U.S. victory of the war. Right? Washington had won, several smaller victories before this, had lost a lot more smaller battles than a few big ones. But Saratoga, in this case, Washington outsmarts, outmaneuvers the British, gets them in a situation where the Continental Army actually outnumbers the British, kills several hundred British, the rest surrender. That's what's happening here in the painting, is the British are surrendering to Washington. They capture 6,000 British prisoners of war. This is impressive, and it pays off right away. France has just been waiting for the Americans to show they can fight, and now that Americans have shown that, the French conclude a treaty of alliance with the United States. Benjamin Franklin had been in France for a couple years now, making friends, schmoozing, asking for help. They'd been stonewalling him because the Americans hadn't won anything, but now the news of the Battle of Saratoga comes. Franklin can close the deal with the young new king, Louis XVI. The French Treaty of Alliance is a permanent defensive alliance, meaning France is helping the U.S. now, and in return, the U.S. in the future, if France is ever attacked, the U.S. will help France. If anybody ever attacks the U.S. in the future, France will help us. That's a permanent defensive alliance. BFFs, I got your back. And France immediately begins to deliver. They ship thousands of troops over to North America to help to help the Patriots fight. And they send money. They help solve the cash flow problem. Now, it's not all the way solved, but like any money is good. Some of this is gifts. Most of it is loans that the U.S. is going to have to pay back at some point, but it's all good. U.S. really needed money. The French also engaged the British elsewhere. France lines up some allies. They're fighting the British back in Europe. They fight the British in the Caribbean. Anywhere in the world, French people can find British people to shoot at. They're doing it. And all of this is super helpful. The United States probably could not have won the Revolutionary War without French help. Now, meanwhile, let's check in with civilian life. Patriot and Loyalist militias and armies are pretty hard on the civilians. Now, some of this is just normal. In warfare, before really the last 100 years, it was hard for armies to carry all the food and supplies they needed, so they took what they needed from local civilians. This is confiscation, but it's legal. The military term is to requisition, to take supplies that you need. If the farmer whose harvest is getting seized is on the same side as the forces that are taking his harvest, then he's likely to be paid, right? A loyalist farmer will be paid usually in coin, because the British Army tended to have cash. If it's a patriot farmer giving up his harvest to patriot militia or the Continental Army, they won't have cash to pay him, but they can pay him in bonds, right? Those certificates, the IOUs. If we win the war, when the government solves its cash flow problem, you'll get paid what we owe you plus interest for every year that passes between now and then. But if you're a farmer or merchant whose harvest or inventory is being seized by a military force and you are neutral or on the wrong side, they're not going to pay you. That's going to be your consequence for failing to be on the right side. So, of course, the wise farmers and merchants would claim to be on the side of whoever was taking their stuff, so they have some prospect of compensation. Now, militias aren't very good on the battlefield, but they play a major role in forcing civilians to pick a side. Remember, 40% of the population are patriots supporting the revolution. 20% are loyalists supporting Britain. The other 40% aren't taking sides, just don't want to get shot. But the militias are intent on forcing those people to take sides. Patriot and loyalist militias will roll into town and they'll try to get people to take loyalty oaths. Patriot militias will be wanting to force people to swear oaths of loyalty to the United States. Loyalist militias will try to force people to pledge loyalty to Britain. And if you refuse to swear a loyalty oath, well, there's going to be punishment. A popular torture was tarring and feathering. This is dunking somebody in hot tar or painting someone's skin with hot tar, then rolling them in chicken feathers so they look like a ridiculous chicken man while they're being kicked and beaten and insulted. Another go-to penalty was riding the rail. The guy's on a sawhorse there, but it's not just any sawhorse. He's got weights on his ankles to pull him down. Now, for a little while, you might be able to support some weight with your hands, but ultimately you're going to be pretty uncomfortable up there. People are going to be yelling and throwing stuff at you. Eventually you'll probably fall off, and then they'll put you back on again. These are both painful and humiliating tortures. They're usually not fatal. That's why they have the gallows here in the background, because militias occasionally would execute the patriot militias would look for leading loyalists in a town to hang. Loyalist militias would look for prominent patriots to hang. Occasionally there were massacres where patriot militia would murder several loyalists, or loyalist militias would murder several patriots. Now, because there are twice as many patriots as loyalists, there are more loyalist militiamen than loyalist militiamen, and consequently, patriots are more often perpetrating this abuse of civilians. We're going to talk about the worst massacre during the Revolutionary War next. The worst of these massacres took place in 1782, when a Pennsylvania Patriot militia slaughtered 96 Moravian pacifists, who, as you can see from the illustration, were Native Americans. Now, Moravians were the original Moravians were German. There were German immigrants in the colonies who were Moravians, and Moravians are pacifists, meaning they believe violence is sinful. They're against war. They refuse to participate in war. And the German Moravian immigrants had preached to this particular group of Indians in western Pennsylvania. And so colonial militia rolls in and says, what side are you on? They're like, well, we're pacifists. We're not on any side. We don't believe in war. We're neutral. That was the wrong answer from the Patriot perspective. Patriots also accused the Moravians of having, there had been a raid on a frontier settlement that had killed a few white folks a couple weeks before, and they accused the Moravians of having done that, and the Moravians are like, we're pacifists, we don't kill anybody. But the Patriots weren't satisfied. The militiamen took a vote, and there were 160 militiamen. 142 of them voted to kill all the Indians. 18 voted against it, and those 18 stood away apart from the violence, while the others attacked. Well, they actually let the Indians spend the night, praying and singing, while the militiamen drank all the communion wine and got drunk, and then started the killing. The massacre, the caption here indicates massacre of the Christian Indians. Of the number thus cruelly murdered by the backwoodsmen of the upper Ohio, between 50 and 60 were women and children, some of them innocent babes. The witnesses reported that one soldier taunted an Indian by pretending to offer the Indian his hatchet with the words, "Strike me dead." When the Indian answered, "I strike no one dead," the soldier struck at the Indian and chopped his arm away. The Indian kept singing a hymn until another blow split his head. The Moravians, as they were being butchered, were praying for the souls of the colonists who were murdering them. One of the ringleaders was a guy named Nathan Rollins, whose dad and uncle had been killed by Indians a few years before. Not by the Moravians. The Moravians were pacifists, but we've seen before that the Americans aren't picky. They will take revenge on any Indian who's handy. So Nathan Rollins took the lead in murdering the Indians. Nathan Rollins had tomahawked 19 of the poor Moravians, and after it was over, he sat down and cried, and said it was no satisfaction for the loss of his father and uncle after all. Meanwhile, back in the normal war, soldiers versus soldiers, it was going well. In 1781, the combined U.S. and French forces deal a thorough defeat to the British. The British surrender at Yorktown. This is the last big battle of the war. The British are done. Yorktown has convinced them that they're wasting their time. What's happening here in the painting is in the center you have British troops in red surrendering on the left, French forces on the right, American forces accepting that surrender. Peace negotiations begin back in Europe. Meanwhile, an actual conspiracy breaks out here. Now, we've talked about fake conspiracies a lot in here, the popish plot, conspiracy fantasy nonsense. This is a real conspiracy. The legal definition of conspiracy is when two or more people plan a crime together. And in this case, it's a Newburgh conspiracy. A bunch of army officers are upset. They're tired of not getting paid. And so they have an idea. The idea is they think they can get paid if Washington crowns himself king. George Washington is a rock star. He's a hero now. People regard him as the main reason the country has been able to prevail in this war. So they believe Washington is popular enough to crown himself king, and with the army behind him, who's going to stop him? Of course, for this conspiracy to work, they need Washington on board, and they invite Washington and Washington accepts their invitation, comes to talk to them. Washington has written a speech, and he pulls out the speech, and then can't read the speech without his glasses, so he pulls out his glasses and puts them on and explains that he has grown old and also lost much of his eyesight in serving his country, which causes some of the assembled soldiers to start crying, and then Washington lets him have it in his speech. He says, "There is no way that I'm going to agree to be a part of this conspiracy. I am not going to pull a Cromwell on the American people. Patriots fought for government by the people. We are not going to impose a monarchy on them. That's ridiculous. You guys should be ashamed of yourselves." This is a significant aspect of Washington's greatness. He probably could have crowned himself king here if he had wanted to, but it is more important to him to live up to the principles of the Revolution than to be personally powerful. Congress, however, is scared. They look under the couch cushions and scrape together as much cash as they can so they can pay soldiers at least a little bit of what they're owed to prevent further shenanigans along these lines.